talking about the Integrated Skills and Core Competencies tool and how we can use it in our everyday work across disciplines as well as in supervision and in the work that we do in communities as well. It's a really integrative tool that can be really interactive depending on the different ways that you choose to use it. So we're really excited. I also want to give a plug to our Facebook page and to go ahead and go over to Facebook and like our Facebook page. And we're also really working on gaining members. So on our Facebook page, there's also a membership form that you could fill out, and you gain access to some literature and research, as well as early notices for training around the state, and some kind of fun grab bag competition type fun things to do on Facebook that can gain you some extra resources. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lynn to talk a little bit more about how this tool was developed and kind of the history around it.
Well, hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Lynn Brown, and I currently am at Nebraska Children and Families Foundation, and I coordinate a early childhood mental health initiative that's kind of new to our state called Rooted in Relationships. But prior to that, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit, is I was at the Department of Health and Human Services, and I coordinated an early childhood systems grant that was called Together for Kids and Families. It's still in existence. I don't know why I just said it was called, because it is still happening. And as part of that comprehensive systems grant, we were to address early childhood mental health. And so there was a small work group that had been working on this actually for some time together, because this grant started in 2003. So we'd had an early childhood mental health work group that had been working on different strategies, and particularly in the beginning really was working to bring up the pyramid model in Nebraska. And as we moved forward in that, the group kind of re-energized and reformed and needed to do strategic planning again, and that's where the core competencies came into play. The group was comprised of really a lot of different people from different disciplines, and if you look at the document, I know we sent it out earlier and you can download it, but if you look at the actual document, there's names of people that were on the group, and that most of them continue on that group to continue together working. And we're representative of different people across the state. That group, as they talked about what is it we need to do around early childhood mental health, that's something we could do statewide that would be helpful, that would be part of community building and professional development around the topic. It was brought up that many states had core competencies for infant and early childhood mental health specific to their state that they used for their professional development systems, and it would be really, people felt it would be really nice to have those in our state. So the group worked together for quite a while, kind of identifying, and at first it was even hard for all of us to agree on terminology. So I think that's really important to think about, that it really does depend on which discipline you're trained in and you've been working in, to even come to some agreement on what were the words that we used. And even though we realized we were talking about the same things, we were often using different words to describe those. So it really took the group some time to come together, but I think of that as sort of, we built some good trusting relationships with each other as we went back and forth on trying to figure that out and agree on terminology and what all of our different disciplines really believed in about the topic. So as we continued to work together, these really developed from the idea of just early childhood mental health, or it really started as infant mental health core competencies. And we looked at examples from other states and even really considered at first just adopting the Canadian infant mental health core competencies that had been developed because people in the group really thought that those were, that it was good work. But as we continued to talk, we really wanted something more tailored for Nebraska, and decided that it would be really nice to kind of crosswalk them with the early childhood education competencies. So we kind of started with that idea, and from that idea moved even farther to where the competencies are now. So on this slide, it talks about how long it really did take us to move in this process. I mean, it took us over a year to really get them developed and get to some agreements and decide what we were going to do. And then we did a lot of research and looked at competencies from other places. So we kind of gave you a list there of Vermont, New Mexico, and Michigan. Many of these states have core competencies now that they've really embedded in their professional development system, and they have certificates so that people can become certified. And we'll talk about that more later, I think. But that's sort of a hope for the future. So we looked at, as I said earlier, the early childhood education competencies. We looked at other things nationally. 0 to 3 has a lot of materials out there, and in fact, they did a webinar today about this very topic. And then we looked at, when we at some point decided to add home visiting to this. And I think it was about the time that the federal home visiting dollars were coming to Nebraska, the maternal, infant, early childhood mental health, and many of us were working on that project as well, and said, wouldn't it be interesting to think about how the core competencies cut across that discipline as well in home visiting? So we added that. We looked at Healthy Families America and the Head Start relationship-based competencies. So a lot of research went into the design of these over quite a period of time. And I'm really going to give most of the credit to our work group. I was just the orchestrator of kind of continuing to pull people together to talk about it, do a lot of research. There were many people that worked on this. We distributed them from to professionals in all 3 of the disciplines, so in early care and education, mental health, and home visiting, for review, and we got a lot of feedback. Tracy did some focus groups in Omaha, and she can maybe talk about that more later as well. So we got a lot of feedback there also from the different disciplines. And so we did a lot of editing before we finalized these and then began dissemination of them.
So hi everybody, this is Jen Gertis, and I also worked on the development of the tool. It just has occurred to me that if you didn't have a chance to look at the document, you may not know what we're talking about, and we didn't really specify that. So let me do a little intro to the document, and I'll just pull it up here so we can all see it together.
Good job.
Because as Lynn was talking, I thought, you know what, I bet some people are actually kind of confused. So this is the document. As Lynn said, it was important for us to look at cutting across disciplines. So we wanted, instead of having core competencies for early childhood education, standalone from core competencies for early childhood mental health, standalone from home visiting, we thought, well, surely there's a universal competencies that cut across all these disciplines. So there's common fundamental competencies that someone needs to have. And so we looked at the literature and all those things Lynn was just talking about to figure out what those universal competencies might be. And here's the list Lynn was talking about of who was involved in the writing of them. So we ended up with 11 competencies. So that's in the left-hand column, what the competency is. And then we talk about what does that competency look like in practice in each of the 3 disciplines. So in mental health, it may look one way, in early childhood it looks one way, in home visiting it looks another way, but the underlying competency is the same across all the disciplines. So we really wanted to show this integrated approach, and that these 3 fields really do intersect, and they aren't. That really, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, all of these fields can touch the life of a child at one time, and recognize that there sort of are those universal truths, might you say, of best practice in these fields. So this is the document. We tried to keep it short, understandable, and use existing information. So like all of the early childhood pieces are pulled from our existing early childhood core competencies instead of writing new ones. So we tried to streamline and make it very user-friendly and engaging. So that's a document that in your email too. So, okay, Tracy, you're up.
Okay. So my name is Tracy Penrod McCormick. During a good chunk of this time where the document was made, I was a part of that. I was working at Child Saving Institute in Omaha, and I've recently actually joined a private practice now. I've had a couple kids and have decided to have a little bit more time on my hands and work part-time, so I've now moved into private practice. But during that time at Child Saving Institute, I was doing work that included providing mental health consultation in child care centers, and then shifting to managing the larger Kid Squad program in the Omaha metro area that provided education on mental health consultation to child care centers around the metro area. So working also with collaborators from across the city, coming from various disciplines and various administrative levels as well as direct support levels. So was able to bring some of that into the thought process in developing this, looking at things coming from multiple disciplines. And one of the biggest things in developing this tool that I know Lynn and Jen have both mentioned is that we are all coming from, in the core, the same goal. We are coming from our own disciplines, but we want the same thing for all children and families. We want to support them and help them be successful and give them a good early start, both social, emotionally, and academically, so that they can enter into kindergarten ready to learn and ready to have healthy, pure relationships. And as you guys all are aware, in the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's been an explosion of research around brain development and social emotional awareness and emotional literacy that we've all been exposed to has given us an amazing framework to work from. And each one of these disciplines has progressed and evolved in incredible ways over these past years using this same framework. And this tool was really built on recognizing those strengths and recognizing that work coming from this new research that we can pull together to use together in a collaborative way to support children and families. We represent each one of our own disciplines with really having passion for mental health or education and school readiness or positive parenting, but together our goal is the same, and this tool is really helping individuals recognize the root of where each discipline is going to really encourage teamwork and communication and collaboration in communities. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was one of the big things and one of the big frameworks that is bringing all of us together. And everybody's aware of the amazing work that Bruce Perry has done. And an example here is the 6 core strengths for children that really look at the 6 things that children need to have healthy attachments with their families, with their peers, and to really gain self-confidence in walking into new situations and new experiences with the capacity to believe in themselves and the others around them. And so these are kind of the 6 building blocks that kids need to master in order to gain those. So attachment, self-regulation, affiliation, attunement, tolerance, respect. Those components, all building on one another, kind of give us this healthy, well-rounded child that can do quite well in his home as well as in different environments in their life. So we know attachment is the ability to form and maintain healthy relationships with both caregivers, parents, and peers. Self-regulation, the ability to maintain themselves during frustration, impulsivity, and different feelings, happiness, being able to manage those pieces. Some of the things we don't hear as much about, we hear a lot about attachment regulation, is affiliation. So what is that? How do we help children join a group. These are some of the huge things that you're going to see more in early childhood education. But we're also being aware of that as mom takes child to the park and child wants to join in with 5 other children. Attunement, being aware of themselves as well as others that they come in contact with. Tolerance, understanding and accepting themselves and the differences that they hold in comparison to others and accepting others, as well as the respect of really being able to take those in and enjoy them, and instead of judgment and negative behavior. So these are some of the framework that I was talking about where every one of us on this webinar can identify a goal that in the direct work or the work of our staff are working towards some of these goals. And this tool is something that can really help bring us together, like I said, in some coordination of those. We're going to go ahead and watch a video here real quick that talks a little bit about those. And then we'll chat a little bit more.
Through childhood and adolescence, you acquire new capabilities. I think everybody kind of knows that. When you're a baby, you can't, and then you learn how to stand, and then you learn how to walk, and then you learn how to run. So there's a sequential, sensible acquisition of functions. And that's, in fact, what these core strengths are. They are different strengths that literally build upon each other. So that the first strength, call attachment, the ability to form a dyadic relationship, one-to-one, with a caregiver. That's one of the first neurobiological processes that's being organized and developed in the human brain. It starts even before you're able to sequentially develop these skills.
Okay, so nice review for us about the framework and the goals of which many of us are working. You know, it would be nice for Jen, Lynn, and I to know a little bit more about each of you. So if you had a minute just to throw into the comment section what each one of your disciplines are and what sort of environment that you work in, that would be helpful for us to understand where each one of you is coming from. So, okay, video, the common goals. So like I said before, for all of us working, the assumption is that each one of us is working within one of these three disciplines, potentially child welfare, as well, that we all have a common goal, wanting to help children and families attain these goals that Dr. Perry discussed in his video, and helping parents gain the competency to provide some guidance for each one of these skills. And this tool is really one that we want to help educate one another and give each other the ability to increase the amount of teamwork that we're really working for in each one of our communities. So if we talk about this tool in relevance to practice, so each one of us who's working towards providing care to families or children, directly or as a whole, or supporting a community effort that's doing so. Like Jen and Lynn talked about earlier, the universal competencies came together. This group put them together through a great amount of research and really looking at whether other states were using and how they were using it, and what is the best practices that we see for children and families in our communities. It's a really quick tool to review best practice for you as an individual and what you're doing in your individual work with children and families, as well as a review to check and see what, you know, if Joey's going to preschool, these are the main goals that his teachers are likely working on that are also connected to the stuff that I'm working on, and how can we mutually work together. I'm trying to like read your comments and do this, and it serves to be very interesting. And then it gives us an opportunity to say in a comprehensive way, this is what this child is receiving, and where can we increase or enhance our own individual skills to support the family as well, and look at it from a holistic approach instead of becoming or maintaining practices in a siloed way. So if we wanted to look at some of the experiences, and then I'm happy for anyone to throw into the question area of the webinar a particular scenario in which you might want to throw out to say, okay, how could we work together in a teamwork-like fashion in this particular instance? So if we were looking at Isabel here, who's 5 months old today, her mom and dad are teen parents still in high school. Mom experienced a maternal depression, and they live with a grandma who works to help support the family. So I just want to come over here to the PowerPoint real quick, or the actual competencies. And I want us to look again at some of what Jen talked to us about. Over here on the left, you're going to see the competency. Next, you're going to see the mental health supports of how to integrate that competency into the direct work you're providing to children and families. Next would be the early childhood pieces that would match with that, and then next the home visiting. So as we talked about earlier, as a quick best practice tool, this is a good thing to check into periodically to say, okay, these are the things that I learned in school that are best practice for kids. I want to go back and say, for Isabel, who's 5, and I know mom has some maternal depression, these are some areas that I may be able to focus on. I'm going to scroll through, I'm going to look at the competencies and say, okay, I know that mom needs such and such, and Isabel needs such and such. How can I, as her home visitor, make sure that I am providing the best practice for her. So an example would be, trying to switch back and forth here. So for mental health, we would be, if we're looking at this tool and looking at how holistically and kind of wraparound-wise you would be supporting this family, mental health would be Isabel's mom is receiving services to assist with maternal depression. Okay, great. We're happy to hear that. We're happy that she's accessing that. In her early childhood education, she's attending Happy Place Childcare, where an early childhood mental health consultant provides support to the teachers to help the environment be consistent and predictable every day. In regards to home visiting, Isabel's family has a home visitor who provides regular support to the family. So for me, if I am the early childhood mental health consultant that's providing care and support to the child care center, I want to understand also what are the relationships that mom has. I need to understand when mom comes in and is dropping Isabel off and she looks tired and scattered and is struggling to give me a report of how Isabel's night went, I want to understand, and I'm going to help coach my teachers to understand what other support she's getting outside of our child care center, and how how I can coach that teacher to be connecting with the home visitor as well as potentially the mental health provider, because I want to know how we can support her. What information does she need to know? What coaching does she need to know? What handouts would be helpful for her? What types of discussions would be helpful for her as she's picking up and dropping off? As a mental health provider for Isabel, Isabel's mother, I want to understand very clearly the work that the home visitor is doing in the home, because she's very much going to be touching on the everyday routines and the caregiving of Isabel, as well as the stresses that Isabel's mother is experiencing and how she's supporting her to ensure that me as a mental health provider and her are working in a parallel fashion, not telling her separate things, and equally not overwhelming her with different tasks that she should be doing, but working together to give her the same information in a succinct way that is attainable for her. So we are not even more part of the overwhelmingness of raising a young child on our own. Does that make sense? I'm waiting for everybody to talk back, but that's just not going to happen. I'm going to just look at here some of the questions. Jen, Lynn, do you guys have anything to add on this scenario?
We feel like you covered it very well.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm going to move on to.
I think it's.
I'm sorry, what?
I think it's written in. I think there's a question that says, would a therapist who would work with them on their attachment help this dyad and family?
So, okay, here it is.
Yeah, it's like two parts that came in, two separate.
Would a therapist who works with them on their attachment? Yes, I would say so. I think, okay, if the therapist is working, so you want to know if the mental health provider who's supporting mom, if she would work on the attachment and the dyad. I think there would be some discussion that would need to happen, I think, with the home visitor to understand what curriculum they may be using and what activities they may be doing. I think that, honestly, in a world of what would be the best is that a visit would take place in the mental health provider's office with both the home visitor, mom, baby, and the therapist to work together to see what's happening and what goals mom wants to have happen. What is overwhelming for mom, what becomes difficult for mom, and what are the joys that she's seeing in becoming a parent and the joys that she's experiencing in falling in love with her daughter, or the difficulties that are barriers to that. So then, as a team, home visitor can be working on specific activities, helping mom understand the cues daughter is giving, the joy that daughter is getting from mom, and mental health worker is also reinforcing those, as well as working on some of the interpersonal things that mom may be experiencing as a parent, as a young parent, and understanding some of her own stuff and her own upbringing and how that could potentially be being brought into this experience between mom and daughter. Does that answer your question, Kirsten? I'm just waiting to hear Kirsten's response here. We'll go ahead and move on to Kevin, and then we'll come back to Kirsten in case you have any more. Oh, here we go. Just about, but had another. Does the home visitor help them find out? Yeah, that's a great thing for a home visitor to do. Would be, so she's asking if the home visitor would help mom understand the temperament of the child. And I think that would be a great example of how early childhood ed and home visiting could be looking at some of those things and talking to each other about understanding the temperament and helping mom. So teacher could coach or home visitor could coach about communication for mom and being able to talk about teacher and saying, hey, what is she like during these times of day? What is she like during these times of day? And then understanding the temperament, and then home visitor can help engage her in understanding those different types of day and different ways for her to make observations, as well as how as mom, she could meet Isabel and what she needs based on her temperament. Now, the nice piece of this would be home visitor and mental health therapist would then talk about mom's temperament and how those two temperaments work together and the barriers that could come and the strengths that could come across with those two temperaments meeting together. Does that answer the question? And I think yes, yay. Okay, so, and in the document, in your actual, your competencies, there is going to be some connections there of understanding self, understanding development and behavior of children and of parents. And so you're going to be able to see that in some of the competence in the universal competencies too. And we'll get a little bit more into that here in just a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about Kevin, who's 4 years old today. He has a thumbs up because it's his birthday. And my mom and dad are not together, but they both love me very much. My mom works a lot to pay bills, and my dad goes to school. I live in an apartment with my mom, and I visit my dad at my grandma's house. I go to Head Start for preschool, and it's fun, and I learn a lot. So if we look at the early ed part of this, the classroom works hard to support kindergarten readiness and has heavy social emotional development teaching practices in their classroom. Home visiting, a family support worker through Head Start, visits the family often and touches base in the classroom, spends time with Kevin, and they get to know him as an individual in order to understand how to support family at home. Mental health. Kevin sometimes withdraws in the classroom, and an early childhood mental health consultant works with him, his teachers, and his parents. So again, if we look, so an example here could be if you look at Competency 1, the Universal Competency 1, which really talks about recognizing the impact of relationships and the role and how they play in the context of learning and in the context of understanding self, and how they go across different environments. So both the relationships that parents and teachers have with one another, teachers have with children, other professionals have with children, and professionals how they have with each other. So many of you are familiar with the Head Start room, and we know that a family support worker and an early childhood education teacher are in the same building. They're under the same roof every day. And how they communicate with one another is going to be incredibly important to the services that are provided to Kevin and to his family. So that communication is incredibly important. What's also important is the relationship that the teacher has with the child and how they connect with the child. The relationship that the teacher has with the parent. If the teacher is respecting the parent, then there is a different level of respect that the child will see if that whole system is communicating together. The child will feel safe, secure, and recognize that there is an environment that's there to support him. Additionally, we can make an assumption that an early childhood mental health consultant or coach is going to be someone from the outside coming in. So now we have to look at the responsibility of those under the same roof to bring that person in to the level of communication that they have under one roof and make sure that they're talking and sharing observations and sharing messages from families. So again, the imperative pieces of this is how are we communicating and how are we understanding the work of each person to ensure that we're cohesive and we're working in a parallel fashion. And the integrated core competencies is one way to do that. So you could look at the goals from Kevin and say, Kevin is withdrawn. Mom and dad are separated, so we can assume that pickups could vary between grandma, dad, and mom. So we now have 3 individuals that could be picking him up on various days, and potentially it's very organized and routine, but it also has the potential for it to be disorganized and chaotic at times. So we now have a withdrawn child with multiple caregivers. So if we can go back to this tool and say the goals for Kevin are to increase his ability to communicate with teachers and peers, to communicate emotions, and to work on understanding patterns, then we can look at this tool and say we need to work on relationships with parents and professionals to develop a schedule of pickup and a calendar for pickup to help Kevin understand who is coming. We can gain access to and look at the tool to say what other pieces of this tool can help us make sure that we're each working towards the same goal. Does that make sense? So this can be an actual resource during a meeting with professionals. So our goals for Kevin are A, B, and C. Under this, we know that competency 3, 4, and 7 all fit within this. So my role as a mental health provider will be this. My role as an early childhood educator can include this. And as the home visitor, it will include this. So it's a resource that we could use. Does anybody have any questions? Jen, Lynn, do you guys have anything to add?
This is Lynn. I guess I would only add that that's sort of, it's kind of idealistic maybe of us to think that professionals might actually get together and talk about this together. So I think at times people are working, as you said earlier, kind of in a very siloed approach with families, and sometimes there's reasons for that. There might be distance issues, there might be confidentiality issues. So I think that it's important to recognize that there may be times when you're working with a family in your particular discipline where you employ the different competencies and practice those just as best practice, but you might not necessarily be able to discuss it with colleagues in the same family at times.
Great, thanks. So as a nice segue from what Lynn said, so the application in the real world, like she said, idealistically, we're going to be having conversations with one another. And at times it's just not going to be able to happen. But what we know is as if there are more people looking at this and having access to this, we're increasing the amount of knowledge that each discipline has in regards to what other disciplines are working towards. This is a basic review of what home visitors work towards. Best practice for home visitors, best practice for early childhood. So if I am a home visitor and I know that I have an individual whose mother is seeing someone for maternal depression, I can assume that a majority of these things in the mental health column are going to be utilized or addressed, or a framework that a professional is coming from. So at any point in time, I have an assumption that if I needed to reach out or I wanted to pair this together, this wouldn't be something that would be completely foreign to a family to receive. So as the other piece, and I'll say this, as a mental health provider doing the work that I was doing early on, I came out of grad school happy with my mental health degree and excited, and I had the blessing to do the early childhood mental health consultation and coaching under the supervision of a wonderful supervisor that had many, many, many years in early childhood education. So I was indoctrinated into best practice for early childhood through my supervision. But without that, having that connection, I would have been completely on my own to understand how early childhood education works and how that system works. And this tool is one that would have helped give me direction there. It would have helped me understand what the best practices and basic practices of an early childhood education classroom would be, and what I could rely on as a mental health professional to know that the children that I was serving were getting in their early childhood education classrooms, to know what I could build from. Understanding that some of the language they were coming into my office using because of what they learned at school was something that I could build on. So it's a nice resource for different disciplines to have to educate themselves on the work that others are doing. The other thing is it does encourage connection and integration. So if you have the opportunity to reach out to other professionals to integrate the work that you're doing and put it together to be connected is really ideal, so that you're supporting families in the best way and decrease some of the siloed approach. The other thing is this tool is a really good tool to check to many of us hit plateaus with families or challenges with families. This is a really good tool as a practitioner of any sort through home visiting, early ed, or mental health, to step back and look at to say, have I really worked this competency the best way that I can, and do I need to go back? Many times when we hit a plateau or we hit a challenge, we've got to go back and re-examine and go back to some of that early relationship building and understanding families and children from the beginning. And this is a really good tool to kind of check yourself and go back and do a self-assessment to say, okay, where do I need to go back to, and what do I need to relook at after we've made this many gains? Things have evolved and maybe changed, and I need to probably tweak my approach in this aspect. Does that make sense? So the other component to this tool that can be used in a really nice way is through professional development. Not only as an individual doing direct practice, but also as a supervisor supporting other people who are providing the work. So as a supervisor, how can this tool be of help to you? One of the pieces is recognizing and developing the awareness in yourself and in your supervisees that it's incredibly important to understand the work of others, to be able to identify the relevance and the importance of those different professions and how they come together to support young children in their development, and how they come together to support families to be the most supportive and healthy that they can be for their children. The other piece is really looking at community collaboration, and I know we talked about this just a little bit ago, is really breaking down the siloed approach for families and recognizing that supports within a community can work together, and that when they do work together, it can be incredibly beneficial and very, very effective for the supports that families are receiving, and the success that families can have when they recognize a community coming together to support them. The secondary piece of that is that families really learn how to advocate for themselves. They learn how to see others working together and communicating and recognizing that they may advocate for themselves and for their family to receive the services that they need, and really become nurtured in a relationship that's coming together for them. That it can really empower families as an institution to recognize that they're not alone, when many times families suffering these sorts of stressors can feel very much alone and very much targeted at times, depending on the nature of the referral. I am noticing here, I do want to just go back real quickly, that we do have some foster parents with us today. And I want to make sure that we look at how this tool can be effective for them as well. So I don't want to forget that, okay? So don't let me lose you guys, okay? So additionally, for supervision, this tool can be used in a really great way for self-assessment. It can be used, like I said before, when you're in the middle of a difficult case and a challenge, or have reached a plateau, or periodically to ensure that you're utilizing best practice and making sure that you're aware of what others are doing that are collaboratively working with a case. In the use of reflective supervision, this tool can be quite useful as well. It can offer the opportunity for skill development and understanding of the direct service worker in the case, as well as what may be going on for others involved in the case. So an example, if you want to look at Competency 1, which talks about appreciating and recognizing the impact and role relationships play in the context of all learning, growth, and change, including but not limited to relationships between the child and other children, parents and children, parents and professionals, professionals and the child, and professionals together. And if you're looking, if you're providing supervision and support to a worker who's working on a very challenging case, reflective supervision, an example of a topic of reflective supervision could really include, as an individual, if I am a mental health worker working maybe in particular on a case, maybe like Kevin or Isabel's, is understanding how it may feel for myself as a professional walking into a building where two other professionals are working together and I am the outsider. How does that feel for me, and how do I present myself to them and present myself as a team in the classroom? And what does that mean maybe for my relationship with the child? So a lot of that reflective stuff that needs to happen to make sure best practice is happening. As an early childhood provider, this could be used in reflective supervision, in particular with this competency, is looking at where your relationship with a child or your relationship with a parent, and understanding how you feel about the parent could very much influence how you feel about the child, or vice versa. And supervisors really using this type of competency to bring up those types of conversations for professionals to become aware of and understand how it impacts service being provided. I think a very similar scenario could be true for a home visitor, and understanding what it may feel like to have a particular relationship with a parent, and how you may advocate for a family or advocate for a child based on a relationship with a parent or the child. and again, the awareness of that and how it affects the services that you provide. Does anybody have any feedback about that in regards to reflective supervision? Okay. So the other piece, which we've touched on already this evening, is really looking at understanding the goals of other disciplines. So when you're walking into a new case or providing a case and have a new referral for home visiting coming in, or you've just learned that the family is now going to engage in some family therapy, this is a great tool to go to as a supervisor to guide your staff to say, okay, this is a new system that's entering into this family, and it's very important for us to understand what their goals are going to be and how we can make sure that we're working in a collaborative fashion again as this system enters into this family's life. And again, going back to the reflective supervision piece is recognizing how that could impact the family and disjoint or shift the services at that point when other professionals enter in, and how that could make an individual feel, again, when looking at, again, that universal competency one of looking at professional relationships. Again, ideal world, there would be some communication around professional goals and goal planning for the family so that it could be in a parallel fashion, in a collaborative fashion. The other piece when it comes to this is the recognition of the impacts of systems for children and families. This is a tool that can be utilized in various coalitions. It can be utilized in various grant applications to really look at how a community can come together to collaborate and integrate different professions, different preventative programs to support children and families to, again, going back to that framework of preparing children to be ready for school in a social, emotionally, and academic way, and for healthy relationships moving on. So this tool is not only usable for direct service and best practice as well as reflective supervision, but also as a system and for a community to look at of how integration and connection can happen for services for families. Jen, Lynn, do you guys have anything?
You got it. You're doing great, Tracy.
All right. So other potential uses. So ideally, again, you know, we like to think big here. We really, this would be a wonderful tool for higher education course curriculum for different disciplines and public health, for grant writing, social work, psychology, early ed, all these different curriculums to really look at how systems can work together. Not only, again, going back to on a direct service level, but on a supervisory level and on a systems change level. This is a document that can be used to start kind of a grassroots understanding in communities and in education to say, this is the best practice of how you could approach your career, your professional development, and the way that you support families. It could really shift the way things happen and really, again, decrease some of that silo effect that can happen. I love mental health. I love early ed. And decrease, you know, that sense of what we're doing is great and right, which is very correct and very true. But what is best for families is that we all communicate and we all work together to increase efficiency and success for families. Enhance other existing professional development opportunities. So this is a tool that can be integrated into a myriad of other trainings and professional development opportunities that are occurring across our state in particular to enhance the work that we're doing, which again is helping educate other disciplines of the goals and the work and the best practices of other disciplines. So this is a tool that, Jen, Lynn, yell at me if I'm wrong, but it is on the internet and it is there for everyone to use to really enhance these different areas and integrate it into your training. Let it support your training, let it enhance it, and really use it. Please, please, please use it. Initial hire, training, and self-assessment. So this kind of goes back to some of that supervision use. This is a really good tool for some education for individuals coming in for best practice and to establish a precedent of how services are provided in your particular agency. Is when I become hired, this is something that I review and we talk about, and it's recognized that it will become a part of our supervision in a frequent way, as well as looking at it as a self-assessment tool. What are the pieces here that I am actively doing on a regular basis, and what are the pieces that I feel like I need to work on or become more well-versed at? Everything on here isn't going to be something that every single worker does like perfectly every time, but it's good awareness and it's good reminders for us for how to move forward in our practice. And it's through that self-assessment gives a good amount of data for supervisors to support staff in recognizing their own needs and their own strengths, as well as helping them understand the goals of other disciplines and how they can work together. I think I mentioned this a little bit before about community coalitions. This is a really good tool for grassroots efforts and different stakeholders and community coalitions to utilize. This tool, again, oftentimes we forget about the goals of other disciplines and how utilizing these competencies we may be able to work together to increase efficiency of programming in our communities, as well as bringing systems together for the betterment of our early childhood kiddos that are coming up and getting ready for school and working through those early grades of school. It's a great tool to utilize for data for grant writing and for community development opportunities for early childhood mental health. Ladies, do you have anything to add?
I see that Kirsten had a question down here about the impact that insurance, like Medicaid, has on the integrated systems. And she said that she's found that Medicaid will not allow a family to have all of the services at the same time. Do you have any response to that?
Okay, so what I would say is you're correct. Medicaid isn't going to let a bunch of people bill for the same thing. So what I would recommend is, and Kirsten, I'm not really sure what community you're in, and I want to say that you're private practice, yeah. You and I, well, if you are a mental health provider billing Medicaid, there is no other type of system that is going to be able to bill Medicaid for a similar service. So in your community, exploring what partnerships you can develop with early ed, because they are not going to be billing Medicaid, and what sort of home visiting system do you have present in your community. A lot of home visiting, to speak to the communities I'm aware of, a lot of them are grant funded, and so that could decrease on some of that duplication of, you know, what Medicaid would call a duplication of services, but isn't really, because there are different levels of support. So I would really look at what are your community-based grant agency-related support services that you could have to decrease on some of that duplication of billing. So yeah, Kirsten's responding. Jen, Lynn, do we have a map that has what's going on for each community?
There's a lot of that information now on Early Childhood Community Link that you can go to.
Do you have that link that we could type in? Or maybe Charlie will send it out to everybody.
Charlie might be typing that because it's Charlie would know. So on Early Childhood Community Link, you can search for different services by community or by the service. There's a lot of different ways to look for those. And I think in response to your question, often it really is these are really sort of different payment levels for these services. Medicaid won't pay for early childhood mental health consultation in childcare settings. So if that's occurring, it's either privately funded or it's funded through Head Start and Early Head Start, which is part of their performance standards. They have to provide that for kids. So a lot of the services for 0 to 5, as you probably know, is really hard around mental health to get services paid for by insurances. So many of the projects and a lot of the home visiting projects across the state are through federal funding, like through the maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting. I think of other home visiting. Head Start does home visiting, Early Steps for School Success.
Save the Children.
Yeah, Save the Children.
And Kirsten, I don't know if you were asking like for your particular community what services are out there, or if you were looking additionally to look at where there might be opportunities for grant funding to integrate some of these services into your community. So I think if that's if you're interested in looking and growing this sort of system in your community, I think Jen, Lynn, and I, our emails are all on the end of this PowerPoint. You can certainly shoot any one of us an email to talk a little bit more about that if that's something that you're interested in, because there is various what word am I looking for? Activities going on in several communities across the state that might be able to meet the needs that you're looking for. One thing I want to touch on before we move on is I know we have some foster parents on here, so I really want to make sure that we don't forget about them and how this tool could be beneficial and effective for them. As foster parents, sometimes depending on what age of child you have and what needs that particular child has or children have, you can get a barrage of different systems that are now entering your home and people that are calling you and telling you that they need to have this and this and this and this. So this is a tool that can be really helpful to help you understand what you can expect from the different systems that you may be being supported by. There's home visiting integrated into many different types of programming, including your Head Starts and your Early Head Starts. Oftentimes, any sort of early childhood or teen parenting work is going to have some home visiting. So depending on what sort of relationship you may have with biological parents, these are some different things that you could advocate for. Quality early childhood education is going to include these core competencies that you see in every single one of these universal competencies. The early childhood competencies that correspond is really going to indicate some quality and are very, very, very important things to look for in supporting a child in your home if they're in an early childhood environment, to really making sure that these things are present in those programming. Any sort of mental health services that you, the biological family as a system, or the individual child is receiving, again, the competencies listed in every single one of the universal competencies is going to be incredibly important to keep an eye out for. That those are present in the services that are being provided to those kiddos that you're supporting at the time. But this kind of is a nice tool to help you understand what can I expect and what should I advocate for as far as best practice for the children that I am supporting at that time. Do you have any questions about that as far as foster parents, or do you guys have anything to add? Okay. Jen, Lynn, do you guys want to go ahead? Or
Yeah. When we talked about kind of how to, where we're going from here as a group, the group that's been working on this has continued to try to add to the competencies and continue to disseminate them and make them useful out there. And that's been difficult because there isn't really a good way to get them out to all these different disciplines. So it's been a lot of kind of hit and miss work that we've done together. But one thing that I wanted to let people know was that there's been a lot of interest for Nebraska's core competencies at the national level. I've been contacted by several times by people at national organizations such as 0 to 3. I presented about these actually at a home visiting workshop that Nebraska had a team that was invited to go, and they asked us to bring interesting things we were doing in our state around home visiting. So I presented on these, and there were people there from all the states, and people were very interested in how these were put together because they're short, they're readable, and they're useful in practice. As I said earlier, when we looked at other states, some of them were very, very lengthy documents to get through. And as we know, people that are out working in the field, you just don't have time to do a lot of studying. It has to be a quick tool that you can refer to and is useful. So there is still interest. In fact, I was contacted a couple weeks ago by 0 to 3 asking, they wanted the question, they were writing a brief and wanted to know how we were embedding these in our professional development system. And I didn't have a great answer for that because we have had difficulty doing that, but we continue to move forward and try to do that. So Jen's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so some of the feedback and some of the interest too that we've had from 0 to 3 is, and just from professionals in our state, is related to whether there's like a training or some sort of, basically a training to introduce on how to use them in practice and things like that. So that's something that since we first did our rounds of feedback way back in the late summer, fall of 2012, we've kind of been toying around with, exploring different possibilities, thinking about what people really would use and are asking for, and our own capacity to deliver something like that, which is always a challenge. So what we've decided to move forward with at this point is, based on that feedback, to look at first developing more specific indicators for each competency. So right now, like that Universal Competency 1, the statements of what it looks like in mental health and early childhood are very broad and sometimes can encompass lots of things. So we want to look at 3 to 5 indicators of what if you walked into a program, this is what you would see. If you walked in to any of those sort of environments, these are the behaviors that you would see that would demonstrate that this competency is happening. So that's kind of our first next step. The step after that would be then to take those indicators and develop a short 1 to 2 page self-assessment that any practitioner or professional could use to gauge their own competency as indicated by this document. So it would be very quick, very easy, based on those indicators, to sort of say, okay, here's some areas that I need to work more on, here's some areas that I'm really strong in. And then beyond that, so you can imagine as a professional, okay, great, I see now that I need to work on competencies 3, 4, 5, and 7. That's where I have more weaknesses. Then what do I do with that information, right? So then we sort of get to the point of thinking about how do we support people in utilizing the competencies in a more structured way through developing a training guide for supervisors, or we've kind of tossed around some other sort of support ideas. And again, we do want to think about tying our existing professional development to the competencies, and perhaps like identifying at a training, this training will meet competency too. So if you are looking for professional development and you know that's a weakness of yours, you can look for professional development that's going to target those areas of need. So those are some kind of places that we're going in the future, in the near future anyway, and maybe in the far future. And you know, I was on the webinar today that 0 to 3 did about the infant, toddler, and early childhood mental health competencies, and they compared, there's a paper that compares like 6 state systems, and 2 of the states, California and Michigan, were on the webinar. And Michigan started in 1986 on this work. So it's a long process, and their process was grassroots too, and just like ours kind of has started. And so we will get there in baby steps like we always do. But the potential is there to really see this become embedded and more out in the world in the next few years. So as we develop these additional pieces, we're really excited about that. Do any of you have other ideas of either how you might use it or what we could think about adding in the future, or different supports that might be helpful? I know Kirsten had a comment about, Tracy, after you were talking about looking at the child behaviors and then figuring out as the provider, these are the needs I need to meet, and then based on that, then seeing what competency you as the provider would need. Thinking about that sort of as like I can picture it in my mind like a flow chart kind of thing, yeah. You know, which I think is an interesting idea to kind of puzzle over in the future. We could figure out something similar to that. It's kind of an interesting idea. Are there other ideas that anyone has? Tracy, do you see Kirsten's newest question?
Yeah, about linking them to the DC 0 to 3. Yeah, that's an interesting idea, actually. You know, that's a really good idea. I'll take a look at that and see how that might be integrated in. It would be, yeah. I'll take a peek at that and see how we can get that integrated in.
Okay. Yeah. So as Lynn indicated, or I'm not sure who, somebody said it at one point in time. Here's our contact information. Also a link to the competency document that we've been showing and that you also got in your email, but just in case, here it is another time. Are there any other questions right now? Type now, or forever hold your peace until you can send an email, which isn't really that long. Okay, well, thank you for your attention and interest in the topic, and hopefully it was informational to you. Don't hesitate to contact any one of us if you think about ways to use it, or you have questions, or anything that you need related to this topic. We're happy to help. So everybody have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.